I'm going to talk about a touchy subject right off the bat this morning. Trick-or-treating. All right, so I'm going to see how many of you are super conservative and how many of you are not. How many here went trick-or-treating or took their kids trick-or-treating? Be honest. Now, before we try to make this too spiritual, I think we need to recognize as parents, there's a little bit of a hidden motive behind taking our kids trick-or-treating, right? It's about the candy. Now, this year, we went over to the Atrese's neighborhood, and I was struck by something, the drastic difference between Jason and my approach to getting candy from our kids. All right? Now, Jason, I don't know what he's done. He has his kids just enamored with him. And little Nathan comes running up with a full-size candy bar and says, here, Daddy, you like this one? And just willingly gives it over to him. And I was like, wow, that's impressive. You know, for me, my kids don't give up the candy so willingly. And so we've decided at a very young age to teach our kids about the taxation system in our country. We have the parent tax. And so it's interesting, though, because as they've gotten older, they rail more and more against the parent tax, and they don't like it so much. And so, you know, it's kind of interesting. They come running up, and they're like, hey, what'd you get? And like, ooh, Reese's parent tax right here. You know, and then the next thing they come up is like, ooh, Hershey's with almonds. But, Daddy, you've already taken the parent tax. And I'm like, yeah, it's about time we teach you about tithing. And, you know, at one point, Bethany said something, Daddy, if you get everything you want, I won't have anything left. And I thought, yeah, you know, a couple wrappers and a half-eaten candy bar, now you know what every day's been like since you were born. Right? It's interesting, though, as we get older, what bothers us changes, right? Bethany, you know, is maybe bothered if Daddy steals. I have to give her credit. She eventually did willingly give up something. Something she didn't like, for the record. Those off-brand Tootsie Rolls. I don't know what those things are. I'm pretty sure somebody peeled some old gum off the pavement and rolled some other things into it and then put it in a wrapper. But anyways, what bothers us changes. You know, when we're little, it's losing candy, or you know, if the kids are playing with the Legos or something, and man, you know, they want that piece. They've got to have that figurine or whatever. And you have to understand, my kids have like an insane amount of minifigures for their Legos, but they always want the same one, right? And we fight over things, but when we get older, different things bother us, right? Like, I don't know, the car breaking down, or bills, or, you know, just the struggles we have in life. And as I was heading into this week, I personally had a kind of a rough day Tuesday. I'm going to share about that in a little bit, but we just, we have hard times. And I think one of the hardest verses in the Bible to really hold to is Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Devin, I am not getting anything. Do not be anxious about anything. Now, I don't know about you. I often find many things to be anxious about, but it says, do not be anxious about anything. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. I think this is one of the most challenging things to us. And, you know, it's easy enough to lay things before the Lord when things are going well. But the question that always comes up, though, is what about when nothing goes right? You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Guys and gals? When nothing goes right. So I got to tell you about Tuesday. I got home from the office, and first of all, I worked Monday. I was here with, we were really blessed. Faith Christian School sent a bunch of students over here. They did a bunch of work in the church, and that's why like some bulletin boards and stuff are down. I'm really thankful. But so I worked Monday, and I know that's a bad idea for me. I really need my Monday off. It's just a time for me to kind of wind down from the stress of everything Sunday. So I was already kind of wound up, and Tuesday I get home, and you know it's 40-degree monsoon season in Michigan, right? Well, so I get home, and Wendy makes the point. She says, you know, we took Oreo last month to meet her boyfriend/husband, whatever you want to call him, and our goat, and she's like, I don't think it worked. And I'll let you figure out what that means. And so we need to take her again. You know, it's a guarantee. So you pay the money and you keep taking her back as many times as it takes for her to be pregnant. And so I was like, oh, man, it is rainy and everything. So I had to get the trailer ready, put the tarp over it, get everything together. We went up. It's up by Memphis, so it's a little bit of a drive. And we get back. By the time we get back, it is like 6:30. And so we haven't even eaten dinner. And so my kids are, you know, they're telling me they're hungry. And I think they're a little bit hangry, you know, where they're angry because they're hungry. And so we get the brilliant idea. It's like, leave the trailer right on there. There's a place on the way that I needed to get some straw. We were out of straw. I was like, I'll grab some straw. We'll get some dinner, and it's all good. And while we were getting dinner, which was Taco Bell, so that just sets the bar right there. My stomach didn't feel good almost immediately. And so we got it, and it just became a torrential downpour. We got back to the house, and I pulled out back by the barn real quick because even with the tarp, the straw's getting wet. And I don't want to ruin it, and so I'm trying to get things in. And then I go to put my trailer away, and I realize something. It's like it's all going on 8 o'clock by this time. It's dark, and it's rainy. Anybody ever tried to back a trailer in that? You can't see a thing. And so me and my brilliance, after several attempts and realizing I'm not going to have a clue if I'm going to hit the tree or not, the many trees in my yard, I decided to open my door and hang my head out and do the, turned back, and it's pretty good. Here's the problem. I'm already, a little bit anxious and frustrated because it's rainy, it's nasty, I'm in a hurry, right? And in my process, I have leather seats, and sometimes those boogers are slick. And I started to slide out the door. I was leaning a little too hard. Now, here's the problem. When you start to slide or fall, what do? You try to catch yourself. I was holding the door. So you know what catching yourself does? It pulls the door shut on my own head. Now, my wife will tell you I have a very hard head, and it can probably take such abuse. But it immediately, I'm still a little bit tender up here. I slammed it pretty hard into my head. And so I'm frustrated. I get the thing backed around. It takes me several attempts to try to get the trailer backed up to the garage because, again, I can't see. It's dark out. The kids are looking at me like I'm starting to get a little crazed because this is just, I'm wet. I'm frustrated. And, at one point I'm trying to back up and I hit the brakes kind of hard. And I heard Jacob, I think we should put our seatbelts back on. You've had those nights. I know you have. So finally I get it up there and I just give up. I unhook the thing and push it in my hand, and then I'm going back, and the tarp I had stolen off my wood pile, and I'm like, oh, my wood's getting wet. So I want to go put it back, and I bang my shin. I have cinder blocks holding up my wood pile, and I have extras stacked beside it. You do the math, bang the shin, and I was really frustrated. So my last thing, I finally walk up to the porch, the back porch. I'm like, everybody's inside. They're getting ready for bed. And so I'm like, I'm going to knock on the window and say, hey, somebody flip the back lights on so I can see and quit banging my shin. I'll remind you, it's still pouring rain. Now, you have to know something about when my family gets ready for bed. My wife was back in the back room. Josiah, he is the human jukebox, okay? He is always singing something. Here of late, since we watched a bunch of Star Wars, it's been the Darth Vader theme song. So my son, at the top of his voice, I'm sure, is going, dun, 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 dun. In the meantime, Dad is at the back door, starting politely knocking, and ever more exasperated, saying, I'm locked out. I really need someone to turn the lights on. Long story short, I had a full-blown temper tantrum on the back porch. I don't think I need to explain what that looks like. I kicked the air. I kicked the siding. I put a dent in the siding. Which did get the attention of my wife. She came running out to find out what the big bang on the house was. And she turned the light on, and, when everything is going wrong, it's really hard to keep her focus. Now, we have just been working through James, and we've been looking at James addressing the rich, some of the landowners, some of the merchants, and how they worked with people. As we move into verse 7 in James 5, we see James turn his attention back to some of the people that everything is going wrong. Nothing's going right. So if you want to be with me, we'll be in James chapter 5, starting in verse 7. It's on you again, Devin. I have no idea why this isn't working. James 5, starting in verse 7, hear the word of the Lord. James says to his readers, be patient. Therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. Sometimes we just need to hear those words, don't we? Be patient. I tell that to my kids 100 times a day, seems like. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Now here we see James really turns his attention. It's a little bit of an end times view. He's talking about the return of Christ. But he says, listen, in the meantime, while you're here, those of you that are suffering at the hands of maybe the rich that have shortchanged you, or throughout the book, he's talked about hardships, right? Remember chapter 1, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. James has been talking to these people again and again who have been dispersed, right? They've been chased out of their homes because they believe in Jesus Christ, because they are a follower of Jesus Christ. And they proclaim him, and they cannot hold it in. And so they're chased off, and they're scattered. And he says, be patient, brothers. Now, he gives this example of the farmer waiting for the fruit of the earth. Now, me, I grew up a farmer. I get this reference. You know, there's the thing about farming is you can do everything in your power, and you can have a horrid year. And then there's years when you seem like, man, we didn't even try that hard, and there's such an abundant crop, it blows your mind. I remember one of those years, it was we planted, and we were worried because it was wet when we planted. It was like too wet. So, usually if you plant it's too wet, the seed doesn't get covered right, and the ground isn't broke up right, and things don't grow. But that year we had planted corn really wet, and that year some of our corn stood 14 to 16 feet high, the stalks. It was just incredible. But then other years when we had worked our tails off, it seemed like we got nothing. And he's saying, just like the farmer has to wait. Now, in the Middle East, there was kind of two rainy seasons, and those were normal and necessary for the crop. But the thing is, the farmer cannot do anything to bring about the rain. He can only wait. He can only trust God. Honestly, I think I wish everyone could experience that to some point, farming, because you develop a sense of, God is sovereign, and I'm just waiting on him sometimes. But here is the issue. When James is giving this example, and he's telling them to be patient, James is beginning to address an issue within our Christian spiritual development, and that is, he's been talking about it throughout, this idea of difficult circumstances. And I think in the Church of Jesus Christ, we've really done a disservice to the idea of suffering, of hard times when nothing goes right. We tend to give that a negative view, or something's wrong, maybe I need to change something. But one of the things we need to realize, Devin, go ahead, click. In the context of Christian spiritual development, difficult circumstances, one, are a normal and necessary part of the spiritual growth process. If you grew up thinking that belief in Christ would make everything warm and fuzzy, you didn't read the Gospels that are contained in the book we use here every week. That's not what Jesus proclaimed. Quite the opposite. Not only are they normal, they're necessary for our growth. In James 1, I mentioned it earlier, verse 2, James, remember, he told him, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. Why? For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. James is telling us from the get-go, listen, this hard stuff, you need to be patient, because without it, you will not become the man or woman of God that God wants you to be. When life is cushy, we tend to very quickly disregard spiritual growth in God. We have a propensity as human beings. I just got done reading the book of Judges, and you want to talk about a depressing read. I read it over the course of a few days. Israel, like they would get in a bad spot, right, where there's enemies all around them, and they'd be in a bad spot for a long time, like 20 years. And then it says, and then finally they cried out to God. Now, I don't know about you. It doesn't take me 20 years to cry out to God with a difficult circumstance. And God would send a judge. They would return to God. God would wipe out their enemy. He would have love on his people. And what happened? They start following other gods again. And that pattern happens over and over and over again in the book of Judges. Why? Because when things are going well, we quickly forget about the one who made them well. And we tend to think it's us. Look at me. In the context of Christian spiritual development, difficult circumstances, they are normal and they are necessary. And the second part, they require a humility or a teachability of your heart to be effective in your life. This second part, I think, marks such a vast difference across the board between Christians who become those deep people that you just want to be around because they're so close to Jesus, and those bitter people that no one can stand. It's the humility and teachability and the receiving of God's instruction in the hard times. James goes on, he says in verse 9, then do not grumble against one another. Brothers, so that you may not be judged, behold, the judge is standing at the door. Now, we've seen throughout the book of James, he's again and again harped on this issue of how we talk about each other, how we treat each other, how we interact with each other. We talked in Sunday school this morning about the one another love that we're supposed to have as a body of Christ. James again and again addresses this because I think at the root of it in this passage, James spells out two clear temptations we have when things are going wrong in our lives. The first is this. We tend to take it out on the people around us. Do we not? When my knocking at the window went from polite inquiry to frustrated banging, in a sense, I was taking out my frustration of my bum head and my bum shin on my wife. Right? And as men in this church, let's be honest, you've all done it. And you've all reaped the fruit of such things, right? Where your wife has really let you know about it. But when things go wrong, if we're not humble and teachable, and we start to let bitterness grow up in our heart, we will naturally lash out. And guess what? We're going to lash out at the people that are closest to us. Right? Because they're within the explosion range, right? You know, when a bomb goes off, it's most dangerous in the middle. When you go off, it's the people that are closest to you. The people who love you the most, the people who have put up with you the most, who don't deserve it at all, right? We blow up on them. And James is saying, do not grumble, because I think in the midst of their struggles, he's addressing this deep-rooted issue that we tend to take it out on everybody else. In James 3, he talked about the taming of the tongue. In James 4:11, he said, do not speak evil against one another, brothers. And as we do this, as we don't take this out on each other, this is part of fulfilling that Galatians 6:2, where we say that we're to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Listen, instead of exploding on the ones around you, you bring them the burden. You just say, honestly, listen, this is really becoming a thing. Now, I eventually, once I got inside, I let Wendy know what was really bothering me, and there was more than just my banged head involved, if I was honest. But we can't lash out against one another. If we need help, brothers and sisters, it's okay to go to your family of Christ and say, listen, I'm really struggling with this. But instead, we bottle it up, and then we lash out, and we look like a fool. Either our spouse, our kids, our church family. Now, James moves on. He gives us a really good example here. He says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Now, any preacher that ever says that, if you follow Jesus, everything's warm and fuzzy and all things fall in your way, has apparently never read the Old Testament. The prophets, he says, behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, he says, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. And so he outlines, he says, listen, look at the prophets. If you ever read and really thought through what those guys went through, they're doing what the Lord has told them. They're just literally speaking like I'm doing to you now. And what happens? I mean, in 1 Kings 19, we see Elijah running for his life. Now, when we think about hard times, I doubt anybody in here has ever run for your life for speaking the truth in love. In Jeremiah 38, Jeremiah's thrown into a well. 2 Chronicles 24, Zechariah was stoned to death. And we see the plague and the struggle, the stuff that Job went through. But at the end of the day, the issue is, listen, we want to think that, like, listen, if things are going wrong, it's some sort of God hates me, or I don't know, and maybe we're actually angry at him, but we take it out on everybody else. But the scriptures say, listen, if you're following Jesus Christ, if you're following the Lord, it's not all roses and green pastures. I think it'd be more like, a Michigan fall. Once in a while you have those sunny days, right? That's gorgeous. And then you have monsoon season for 5 days, right? There's just times when things don't go right, when everything comes at us, when people hate us or persecute us, sometimes for doing what we believe is the right thing. Sarah read from Matthew 5 earlier, that blessed are those who persecute or are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. And Jesus said, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Listen, if somebody's really on your case because you're doing the right thing for the Lord, praise Jesus. Give him all the glory, because you've now been counted worthy of honor. Now, I think there's a second temptation when things are going wrong. Not only are we willing to lash out and take it out on people around us, I think there's this issue that James addresses here with swearing or vows. And I'm going to kind of clump that in together. And what do I mean by that? Saying things out of a rash desperation, or people that, and you've seen it or maybe you've done it, they make deals with God. Now, in Matthew 5, Jesus addressed this, but first in James, he says this in verse 12. He says, but above all, now catch this, above all, my brothers, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. James is addressing this issue here, that sometimes when things are really going wrong, we will start to, as we're backed into a corner, we kind of make these promises and these oaths, and sometimes, and it is the person that literally swears to the Lord, right? How many times have we heard that? That's a common catchphrase now. Man, it's a name above all names. And here's the issue. In Matthew 5, Jesus addressed it. Verse 33, he says, again, you've heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord that which you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. And what Jesus is addressing here, and what James is addressing, is in our backed into the corner state, when we are really frustrated and we're down and things are not going right, we tend to want to make these rash promises and like we're making an oath by the Lord. And Jesus saying, listen, you cannot control tomorrow. So don't even make an oath. Don't even swear by anything. Don't make any sort of vows with the Lord. And so many times in times of deep distress, I've heard people say, Lord, if you do this, I will do this for you, and I'm going to follow you, and I'm just going to praise you all my days. And then the Lord works, I don't think because of their vow, and then they fall through on their word, right? And thus profane the name of God. We make rash promises that we cannot ensure will come true when we're backed into a corner. This kind of back and forth that we do with the Lord. And I want to give you an example from the Old Testament. I said I just read the book of Judges. As I said, depressing. In Judges 11, there's this guy named Jephthah. Now, Jephthah, I need to give you a little preface here. So his daddy had a wife and had children, but Jephthah was the son of his dad's time with a prostitute. You follow me? And so as he grew up, his brothers said, you know what? You shouldn't deserve any of the inheritance. You are illegitimate. And so they kicked him out, this Jephthah guy, all right? And it tells us in verse 3 that Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. So is he hanging out with the social elite here? When it says worthless fellows, think mercenaries, think thugs, thieves, whatever dirty, nasty people you can think of. And after a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, come and be our leader that we may fight against the Ammonites. Listen, so here's the deal. He's an outcast. This is like a lot of the modern movies, right? The dude that's an outcast, but he's got a group of like mercenaries around him. He's the warrior, and people go to him in their desperation. I mean, this is like the storyline of a lot of modern movies. Where do you think they get it from? And so they come to him and say, listen, come be our leader. And he does agree. And in verse 30, as he's getting ready to go into war, it says that Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's and offered up for a burnt offering. I'm not sure what he thought would come out his door. His dog? It's kind of morbid. I mean, I've got a cockapoo that I think is not really a true dog, but I wouldn't think of sacrificing her. I mean, I don't know what he was thinking. But in his backed-in corner, his moment of desperation, he makes this rash vow to God. And moving on, it says this. When Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child, and besides her, he had no other son or daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low, and you have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. And Jephthah fulfilled his vow. He sacrificed his daughter as a burnt offering. And here's the issue. When we make rash vows, first of all, we don't know the future. When we swear by stuff, or we say, I'm going to do this, Lord, or I promise I'm going to do this, we have no control. And a lot of times it's a really construed idea about God. Even in this, he fulfills this vow, and I'm thinking, what would God want? Him to fulfill his vow or to not kill his daughter? I mean, this is crazy, right? This is really distorted view of God where he's this deal monger, like, well, I got to make some sort of deal, or I got to swear by him, or something about his that he made to get his attention. And James is saying, listen, but above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes, and your no be no. When we're backed into a corner, when things are going wrong, our flesh will tell us, will scream at us to take it out on somebody else. It's so easy to do. It's so quick to come out. And our flesh would tell us to somehow make a deal with God, or to make some vow or something, trying to make something, work out this thing with God where I can get out of this situation. And Scripture tells us this is not how we interact with the God of the universe, and this is not how we interact with each other. Listen. I know what it's like when nothing seems to go right. I can tell you that right now I have a very personal prayer request that I've put before the elders. And I heard this morning the exact opposite of what I've been praying for has happened. I know what it's like when nothing's going right. But at the end of the day, we can act out of our flesh. We can be nasty to each other. People who really care about your struggle. We can make some sort of vow or swear or something. Or we can just come broken before the Lord. I don't know how or why, but somehow we've got this idea in church that we have to be put together. We have to have us, some of us dress nicely, and we have to have our life together. And my friends, that's not the case. Sometimes we just have to let it hurt, and we have to come into church and say, listen, I need my brothers and sisters around me right now, because this hurts. Don't let it turn to bitterness and anger, but bring it to the altar. One of the things I think that we miss, if we really understood suffering, we want out of it so bad. We want out of the things that God allows into our lives that hurt. But we need to understand a deep truth, that in the darkest valley of your life, God is there. I know we're going to sing about it in a moment, but sometimes we just have to stop and recognize the presence. I think that's one of our biggest struggles in the valley. When we don't recognize the presence, it's easy to get really angry at God, falsely. And then when we're angry at Him, it's really easy to get angry at our brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. Or to start making some sort of swearing by or whatever. Brothers and sisters, when you're in the dark night of the soul, when you're in a valley and you don't know how to get out, when you've been praying and praying that God would work, maybe in someone you care about's lives, and just nothing's changing. And you're trying and you're pouring yourself in and nothing changes. We have to recognize that in those dark times, Jesus is there.